We've got a capital raiser, we've got the deal experts, and then we've got the fund manager, right? And this calls specifically for the fund manager. So disclaimer, this is not financial or legal advice. This is intended to be educational to help people launch their funds. So I'm going to share with you some of my experiences with my own funds and why it was absolutely necessary to have our guest Leila help me out with all of our compliance. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ryan Working. I am fourth generation oil and gas. I own an engineering company, and I buy oil rigs and plug leaking oil wells in California. I also buy oil fields in Texas. I've raised capital through Reg CF, Reg D, and Reg A Plus, and I actually got the first oil and gas Reg A Plus qualified ever. So that was pretty exciting. I got my Series 65 in 3 weeks, and at one point was one of the youngest chief compliance officers in the country with an SEC RA. And I'm an engineer, and I like to solve problems. So I knew I needed my Series 65 to charge a management fee to the fund, and I knew I needed to set up an RIA. And I did not realize what I got myself into. So when I started rolling up my sleeves, I realized that being the chief compliance officer is no joke. I needed help. So I shopped around all the different various compliance groups. And there were some turnkey options, there were some discounted groups. And, with my last group I was with, some of my advisors and board members, their combined net worth was a couple $100 million. And I did not want to take any shortcuts. So that's when I met Leila and her group. And she walked me through what the other groups were offering, what they offered, and it wasn't even close. It was an easy decision for me. So today we have my dear friend Leila Shaver. She's the CEO and founder of My RA Lawyer. She's an absolute rock star. She works with groups that have billions under management all the way to startups. And she's my go-to person when it comes to the latest regulations. So if you guys haven't done so, she has a weekly newsletter that she sends out with like the latest SEC updates and regulations. I highly recommend checking out. There's some gold nuggets in there. So Leila, let's hop into it. You are the only law firm in the country that specializes in RIAs. When and why did you start My RA Lawyer?
Well, first, it's nice to meet everyone, especially here on Good Friday. So hopefully this will be a good webinar. So I started My RA Lawyer back in January 2017. It wasn't something that was like planned, and I had like a business plan, and it was thoughtful, and I had savings ready to go. It was kind of like I was working at a shit place that treated me like crap. I turned 30, I had my first kid, and I just got to the point where I was like, fuck it. If these morons can do it, why can't I? So that's kind of how it started. I quit my job saying hallelujah and walked out the door. I live in the Metro Atlanta area. So, my son was 4 months old when I quit. I was commuting, 2 to 3 hours a day, but, depending on traffic. It just wasn't working for where I was in life. I'm also a terrible employee. I have a mouth on me. So I don't know how to play corporate politics. I don't kiss ass. I have no problem going and telling someone with more experience that I think they're wrong, especially when it's my own license on the line. So all of these were kind of reasons why it was time for me to explore maybe going on my own. And that's what I did back in January 2017. And here we are, April 2023, pregnant, baby number 3. I promise I won't drop it like it's hot here. Even though I look like I might. So we've got a great team here at My RA Lawyer, and I'm very grateful for the personalities and the expertise we have on our team. So we are a full service financial services law firm providing legal and compliance services. So while our focus is on RIAs, RIAs are incredibly entrepreneurial. Advisors are incredibly entrepreneurial. So it's not unusual for us to run into someone whose insurance license is a registered rep, is managing their own private funds. So we kind of look at the RIA as the nucleus, and we work with how all these different roles kind of overlap and work with each other. And I'm excited to talk to all of you guys.
Awesome. So Leila, this group is called part of Fund Launch. And within Fund Launch, there's a group called Black Card. And within this group, there's people that have billions under management. There's people that have hundreds of millions under management. But I'd say the bulk of the folks are what would be called emerging first-time fund managers, right? These are people that it ranges from private equity, real estate, debt funds, venture capital funds, oil and gas funds. And I would say they're primarily Reg D 3C1 offerings, mainly. There's a few international funds, but that's kind of the bulk of the group, right? So for this call, I'd like to start with like through the lens of like how an RIA works, and then how complicated that could be, and then ultimately towards the end of the call, funnel to the exempt reporting advisor stuff towards the end. If that sounds good to you. So
that sounds good. I'll try not to nerd out too hard on it.
I understand. So first question, when do you actually need to register as an RIA with the SEC, and what licenses do you need to have?
So there are a couple of different ways in which you would want to go the SEC registration. The most common is you have at least 100 million in assets under management. That's a little bit different if all you do is manage private funds. That threshold's 125 million in AUM. So that's where we'll talk about exempt reporting advisors and then full RA if you manage private funds only. So 125 million if you're private funds only. If you're doing a combination of other services, so dealing with like retail clients, financial planning, some of these other types of services, then you're looking at that 100 million threshold. Another way that you would go SEC registration is if you would be required to register in 15 or more states. Registering with the states is a super pain in the ass, especially if you have to do more than one. Then you become subject to multiple jurisdictions. They all have their own rules. This state says you can do testimonials. This state says you can't. And if you're subject to several different state jurisdictions, you're going to have to align your policies and procedures with the most restrictive state that you're registered in. So we have that threshold of 15 or more. You can upgrade to SEC registration. If you are an internet-based advisor, or also known as a robo-advisor, that's something that's a direct SEC registration as well. There are a couple other, ways to get to SEC registration that aren't as common. So if you're under the umbrella of a parent company that's registered, for example, that's another way. So there's some of these more rare exceptions that get you to SEC registration, but those are the ways we normally see it. So the internet advisor, the AUM thresholds, and then the 15 or more states.
One of the questions in the chat was, what's an internet advisor?
So an internet advisor is a firm that's only accessible through a portal online. So think of it as a company that has an app. You log in, you become a user of the app. There's an algorithm running in the background. It's very user interactive. There's not, really human interface. It's run by technology or AI. That's really what your internet advisor is. So if you have that component in your business, but you're also doing more traditional fund management, SMAs, that kind of thing, you can't qualify for the internet-only advisor. That has to be your sole business. So there's exceptions to the exceptions to the exceptions.
Of course. So are you subject to SEC audits as an RIA? And how does your firm help prepare for that if you are?
Sure. So keep in mind, the SEC is the government agency. So as long as you're doing anything with securities, the SEC has jurisdiction over you. That's regardless of whether or not you're registered at the state or federal level. That's the government agency. So yes, you're always gonna be subject to the SEC. I prefer SEC examinations to state examinations, and there's a couple of reasons why. First and foremost, state securities commissions, the leaders of those divisions tend to be elected, so they're highly political, and especially in states like here in Georgia where we're purple, and some other states, it can get really messy. So you deal with a highly political component when you're dealing with state securities commissions. The SEC really does try its best to be neutral. So we find that working with those examiners is more efficient, more streamlined, and it's a more consistent experience from firm to firm when they're dealing with an SEC exam. When you're SEC registered, you can pretty much expect within the first 12 to 18 months, you are going to get an initial exam. This is going to be a more limited scope. It's just kind of the SEC registration process. They have 45 days from the time you submit your documents to register you. And for the most part, they let that 45 days go without any comment and you get registered. There's sometimes if you have a more speculative business, there's higher risk involved in your business, you may get some comment letters from them. But for the most part, it's a brief back and forth and you're registered. So they do that examination within the first 12 to 18 months. They want to look at your compliance documents. They want to look at your testing. They want to know how you're maintaining your books and records. They want to know how you're managing conflicts of interest. They want to know about billing. First and foremost, regulators are worried about client harm. So they're really asking a lot of those questions. We recently heard through an examination I'm involved with now, the last 3 years, the SEC were doing these examinations remotely. So they've gone back to a pre-COVID policy where they're now doing it in person. So lucky you guys. If you end up being SEC registered, you're going to get to experience the in-person SEC exam. These are people who are graduating from the top of their class from law schools. I was in an exam where it was one guy, he was a CFP, he was an attorney, he was an accountant, he had no wife, what are you doing with yourself? But these are really, very detail oriented, incredibly intelligent people. And they do a thorough job.
Leila, when you say, let's hop into that role of being a chief compliance officer, and you said
Sure.
like managing conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Being a CCO is very interesting. I think most organizations look at compliance as, the business prevention department, the people that always tell me no. It's the CCO role is really meant to be for someone who has experience in compliance, has the background and knowledge and skill to run a compliance department, and really has the power to execute in their department and make decisions. So that means as CCO, if you hire someone to fill that role, they should have the power to terminate someone. They should have the power to come in and say, we need to get rid of this advisor. That's the kind of power that the SEC and the regulators really expect from your chief compliance officer. So it's an interesting position to be in. And the regulations are changing all the time. I mean, you just look at the last 15 years, how much new regulations been introduced. You look at just the last couple years with our new commissioner and the Biden administration, how much has been changing with digital assets and crypto. There's a huge focus on cybersecurity and hacking. There's a lot going on and things are constantly changing. So you need someone in that role who's going to be able to keep up, learn about what's changing and, be present. So that means going to conferences, talking to regulators. Believe it or not, there's an SEC office here in Atlanta. I sometimes reach out and say, hey, let me take you out to lunch. I want to ask some questions about this regulation. And for the most part, we can do that with the SEC. Not every office is the same in the South. They tend to be warm and fuzzier. You go to like the Boca office or the LA office, especially New York or Chicago. Not as warm and fuzzy, but you kill them with kindness and you essentially get there. Show up with some popcorn or something. But it's just important to remain engaged because there's so much happening. And on top of the emerging regulation, you've got guidance that's being issued, you've got litigation releases that are becoming public. There's a lot of sources of information where if there isn't guidance, you can look at how they're litigating, and they publicize all that. They publicize the charges, the underlying facts that led to the charges, and then the punishment. And that's incredibly informative too, to helping you run a tight compliance program. And of course, the guidance is helpful, but the guidance changes. There's nothing like getting a press release from the SEC that says, hey, these 10 no action letters no longer apply and you can no longer rely on them. Or, hey, we've completely changed how we interpret this rule now. So it's important that you keep up with it. And that is why you run into people that call compliance the business prevention department, because there's so many compliance people that don't do those things. And they just say no, because they don't know. They're not getting trained. They're not keeping up. So there's a lot going on. That's just the SEC. If you're talking about different state jurisdictions and you're trying to keep up with 6 or 7 different state registrations, you have to know the laws of all those 6 or 7 states. So it can be a lot.
Wow, that is a lot. So, Leila, a lot of people are doing Reg D 506C offerings, which allows for them to market and generally solicits and advertise on their funds, right? They can have an advertisement on Instagram or Facebook or something. How does that change when you become an RIA and you're advertising?
That's a very good question. So recently, the SEC changed its rules around marketing. So previously, there was a complete prohibition on things like testimonials, for example, right? So you want to go to a restaurant, what do? You go to Google, you go to Yelp, you go to whoever, and you look up that restaurant. RIAs haven't been able to do that. So there was a marketing rule change that went in place a couple years ago that as an SEC registered firm, you can now go claim your Google My Business page. You can get your clients to go leave reviews, and you can use that in your advertising. That's an SEC rule change. So if you're someone who has to be state registered, there are still states that have laws in the book that prohibits testimonials. And there are some states that reference the SEC rules, so they allow for testimonials. Well, if you're registered, say, in 2 states, one allows for it and one doesn't, you can't have testimonials because you have to go with the more restrictive law that you're subject to. So this is, again, where state laws become very cumbersome if you have to be state registered. But for SEC registration, yeah, you can do testimonials, you can pay. They were called solicitors before, but now they're called promoters because, let's make it more confusing. So you can pay people to promote your business, bring in leads. They've changed some of the rules on how to advertise your performance. So if you want to talk about your fund performance, whether it's hypothetical, it's historical, they've changed the rules on how that has to be portrayed in your advertising. You have to show it both gross and net of fees. So a lot of these rules have been updated and changed recently in the last couple of years. So if you are RA registered, you have to be very considerate of, are you SEC or state registered? You're going to have much more opportunity to advertise as an SEC registered firm.
Got it. Well, let's switch to the exempt reporting advisor. Sure, I think that's where most people in this group are going to fall, I think. So kind of what is an exempt reporting advisor, and I guess how do you meet that SEC threshold?
So think of the exempt reporting advisor as like RA registration light. So you have to, there's something called Form ADV, which is submitted online through a platform called IARD. Form ADV Part 1 is like a fill in the blank, fill in the bubble kind of document. So there's an exempt reporting advisor, someone who has to provide the government, the SEC, certain information about their advising services to funds. The threshold for that is 25 million, where you would have to register as an exempt reporting advisor. And you'd have to give certain information about your fund activities, the amount of assets, that kind of thing. You are subject to some SEC rules around advertising. The problem is that there's not a whole lot of information out there about what all the requirements are for exempt reporting advisors. So a lot of what we know about the requirements of ERA comes from reading the code, talking with regulators, talking with your local SEC office. So every region has an SEC office, and you can go to the SEC's website to find out where your regional office is located. But there isn't a whole lot of information on ERAs. I will tell you this. It's really important that you keep track of this, because I know for some of you, you're charging performance fees. As a RIA, you cannot charge performance fees on accredited investors. You can only do it on qualified investors. So for those of you who are
qualified clients or qualified purchasers?
Qualified purchasers.
Okay. Wow.
So that changes once you're registered. So a lot of funds are initially set up, you're not registered, you're able to charge performance fees on accredited and qualified investors. That rule, that ability changes once you become registered as an RIA. So there's also things like that change once you're a registered entity, that we're so used to in the fund arena of just being able to do. So that's something to keep in mind as well. There may be some restrictions on how you can charge your fees for your funds.
So what does that look like? So let's stay at this. So a couple questions. So before 25 million, you have to register at the state level?
Nope, not necessarily. Which I know is like a bullshit lawyer answer. Like, it may be. So it depends on the number of funds you are advising. So each fund is considered one client, right? So most states have a de minimis exemption from registration. And most of you, if you know this rule, you know it as if you have 5 or fewer clients in a state, you don't have to register in the state. So that's the case in most states, but not all states. So there's some states like Florida and Louisiana and Texas where you would need to register before you took on your first client. So there's that piece to consider. Most states, though, 5 or fewer. So if you have 20 million in assets and it's made up of 3 funds, you're going to, for the most part, be exempt from registration. So you wouldn't necessarily have to go to state registration. But if all of your funds are entities based in Texas, then you're going to have to register with the state.
Got it. Well, so Olha is part of Black Card, and she was like, Ryan, where do we go find this information on the states? Like, is there a go-to location for? Because I was looking up and just Googling, like, hey, what's the ERA laws for Texas or Utah or Colorado? Do you have like a gold nugget resource for all the different states?
Yeah, so I'll put the website in the chat. So one great place to start is NAFA, which is the North American Securities Administrators Association, and it's NASAA.org. So they keep a compilation of state-based information in terms of registration requirements. I'll put a little asterisk next to that and say this is not information that's continuously and daily updated. So I have found sometimes if they have information about a state, it could potentially be out of date. The best way to get the most up-to-date information is searching out on Google for the Securities Commission of that state. So for example, in Florida, it's the Office of Financial Regulation, flofr.org or .gov. So you would go there and you can see all the most recent rules for Florida. And keep in mind too, the state rules are constantly changing as well. So we ran into an incident with a client who thought that solicitors, now known as promoters, weren't required to be registered in the state of Florida. And that was based on an understanding from 2018. Well, that law has changed. And now most states require, if you are compensated for soliciting, right, for bringing in leads to a firm, that's something that's encompassed within the definition of an investment advisor representative. So almost all the states require that person be registered as an IAR in the state. So even the state regulations are changing, and that's something to keep up with. But NASA is a good place to start.
Awesome. Well, at this point, I'd like to open up to Q&A, but there's a couple questions in the chat. Vass asked, does real estate owned and operated count toward the AUM threshold?
So it depends on how the real estate fund is set up, right? So if the fund is set up where we're taking on capital, that fund's then investing in a different company that then owns the underlying assets under management, or the underlying assets, the real estate, then you're going to consider the AUM or the capital you're managing as your AUM for that kind of structure. Where your fund just outright owns the real estate, you get more into a gray area. But generally, we're going to have to come up with, generally, you still have to come up with a number to disclose on the ADV Part 1. And it's going to be more related to your capital raise. And they're going to see that as AUM number rather than the value of the real estate.
Got it. Okay, thanks very much. Makes sense.
Awesome.
Popcorn is not a bribe. Our newsletter does deliver updates. So we provide updates from FINRA and the SEC and state regulators in our weekly newsletter. And it also includes like enforcement releases, any guidance that's come out that's been formally published. So it's a good array of litigation release information, SEC rule updates, and guidance that's been issued.
Awesome. Francis, how's it going, man?
Hey guys, first of all, Leila, I really appreciate your help, your call today. It was really resourceful. I have a couple questions, and Voss is in the same field as me in real estate, and I sort of have not sure that I really like understood the question, but because if as an example we raised $1 million and it's like about 25% cash down on a property, so we have that 10 million is for 40 million like part as an example. We're over that 25 threshold, and if let's say my fund is owning an LLC that owns the property, would that be considered investing in another property? So we would need to register. That's my first question. And my second question is, I'm a Canadian. We're creating a US based fund, and I passed my 65 in December, and I would like to have my registered investment advisor firm if possible. Do you help with that? Can you like be involved in like a board or something like that to help out for our RIA, or so I would just like to have your like sort of a guidance over there for these two questions.
Cool. There's a lot of questions, so I'll try to remember them all. I have a little bit of pregnancy brain, so forgive me. So
AUM and RA, let's put it this way.
So for the first question, again, this is where we're going to look at AUM as the capital raise amount, right? So we're not necessarily going to look at it from how the valuation of the real estate increases based on the initial capital raise. So we're going to look at capital raise in terms of potential AUM number to determine registration. In terms of being in Canada and then trying to start up businesses in the US, if you do that as a foreign entity coming into the US, you are going to trigger an SEC registration requirement. And yes, we help with that. We also help with compliance. We'll serve as CCO. We do all of the outsourced consulting. We do all the testing. So all the requirements that come with having a ERA or a full-fledged RA, our team can assist with the compliance functions and testing for that. Did I miss anything? I feel like I missed something.
No, it's pretty clear. What I think I'll do is on your website, you have a consulting page, and I think like to dig deeper, I think in the specific subject, we'll go over there. And for my personal case, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Lots of questions in the chat, but I'll go to Matt. How's it going, Matt?
Going's great, Ryan. Hey, thanks for bringing on Leila. This is perfect. I am eating this up right now. So kind of a similar situation. A lot of folks on here got my 65, been thinking about how to go this route. And much like Ryan, had no clue what I was getting into when I got it. So nonetheless, here I am, and I've had some discussions with some folks. And one of the things that okay, I don't want to jump the gun. I have a more pressing question. It looks like Nicole was asking this in the chat too, or she was alluding to it. Can you explain management fees and how that works with the different ERA versus RIA versus not being registered at all? I've heard multiple different things, and I think that I'm just not putting the pieces together in my head, but I don't know if it's just as ambiguous as it comes across to me.
So what specifically about management fees? Like how much you can charge? If there's restrictions?
As far as registrations, like for instance, I didn't learn until after I got my 65 that once you set up an RIA, you can't accept management fees for anybody below a qualified purchaser, right? So that was a big revelation to me. It obviously changed my plans. So how does all that work? And how, if I was to delineate how, and I can't find anything online about it. So how does that, if I was just, can you explain it to me?
So I'm gonna correct your terminology a little. You can charge a management fee. So like traditionally we see the 2 and 20 structure, right? So 2% management and then a 20% performance fee. I think what you're talking about is the performance fee. So
sure, yeah.
So you're right. So traditionally, if you're not registered, we're used to funds being able to charge the 20% performance fees, and that's great. When you are registered as an investment advisor, that changes. Because there's a restriction as an RA on what type of client accounts you can charge those performance fees on. And that doesn't get thrown out the window simply because your PPM states that you can. So that's a restriction that you're going to face if you're fully fledged RA registered. As an exempt reporting advisor, it's a little bit more of a gray area. So the good news is we actually just did a review of the code for another fund client. So generally at the ERA level, it's not an issue quite yet because as an exempt reporting advisor, you're not subject to all of the rules that govern a full-fledged RIA. So as an ERA, you can still continue to charge those performance fees, but once you get to full-fledged RIA, that changes.
Excellent. I do have another question, but I'll let some other questions get answered first. Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Nicole had a couple questions in the chat. So I think the first one we just answered. The second one was, sounds like if we're a co-GP on more than one fund, then we should also state register for that reason.
You're in Louisiana.
She's from Louisiana.
Yeah, so this is where you see a lot of funds, they create a new GP and LP entity for each one, for each fund, so they don't run into these registration requirements. And then, you know, their entity is kind of like the sponsor entity that's not responsible for the GP and LP entities. So yeah, where you have one entity that is the GP for multiple funds and those assets accumulate, you are going to be looking at you're going to be looking at registering. Now, whether you have to register at the state level, you in Louisiana, probably, yeah. But depending on the amount of assets you have currently, you may be able just to go the ERA route.
Well, so the question is that it's 3 separate funds. So, you know, I am partners co-GP 50-50 on a fund here in Black Card. Then I was asked subsequently to be a minority co-GP on two very large funds, like 100 million plus. Now they're still in capital raising mode, so they're not at that level yet, but they are intending to be at that level. But my main fund was only $10 million. So I'm like, okay, well, at first it seems like a great opportunity, right, to be a co-GP on a big fund, 3%. But now if I'm going to be helping it manage from investor relations / compliance, now I'm considering, one, does my equity stake need to be higher if it's all this headache? And two, do I have to register? Do I need to get my 65 now? Because now, like, this might change my perspective, like Matt was saying.
So when you say co-GP, are you identified as an individual that's managing the GP entity, or is your entity also a GP along with the other entity?
So I guess the best way to answer it, so like, for example, one is a real estate fund.
Mm-hmm.
There's two GPs on there. Like, let's say they both own 45% or something, from so 48%. They're offering me like 3% to just be like investor relations. Me as a person offering me a co-GP stake of like 3% on that fund.
So you would be coming in under their entity, not through your entity. That's going to be different. That's going to be different. It's different when it's you individually are named in the GP entity and you have certain responsibilities through that entity versus your entity is the GP for the fund. That because we look at the firm registration at the entity level.
Okay.
And then we look at your roles and responsibilities to determine your potential requirement to be registered as an investment advisor representative, or IAR. And generally, that requires a Series 65 license, which isn't a terrible exam to take. You take a week or two and study for it, you knock it out the ballpark. You just got to get a passing score. No one's going to care if you got like 100% right? You just want to pass. I've taken the 7 and 24 and those super suck. So 65 is not as bad. And there are exemptions from the testing requirements. So if you're like a CFP, a CFA, PFS, there's a couple other designations, you're potentially exempt from the testing requirement for those two. So if one of those designations applies to you, you wouldn't necessarily have to take the 65. But we would be looking at whether it's you individually or your entity, what the roles and responsibilities are. So generally investor relations, compliance, those aren't investment advisory services that would trigger an IAR registration.
Okay, that's very helpful to know because it would be me individually on all three funds.
Yeah, and ownership in and of itself is not necessarily a requirement to be an IAR either.
Right, okay.
Question, do you need to be domiciled in the state you are registered as an ERA?
So an ERA is the federal level registration, right? It's an exempt reporting advisor with the SEC. So you would disclose where you're physically located and where your funds are located. But it's not unusual for us to see someone in Georgia and their funds are incorporated in Delaware. Nevada and Texas have become very popular jurisdictions as well. So you don't necessarily need to be in the same jurisdictions.
Follow-up question, what states are the most favorable to exempt reporting?
So again, exempt reporting is federal level, so it's not a state level concept. There is no ERA concept at the state level.
Boom. Awesome. Matt, do you have another question?
Yeah, I do. I was wondering, okay, so one of the things that's been kind of floated around with a couple of guys, and I was about creating an RIA.
Oh no, you froze.
Come back, Matt. Oh no.
Should we sing some Adele? Hello from the other side.
Maybe we'll wait for Matt to come back. Eliza, how are oh, there you go. Matt, you're back.
Oh my gosh. Got internet issues and my kids coming in here. So maybe they're causing the internet issues. So we're looking at putting together an RIA maybe to help out fund managers and help as an outsourcing entity. I have not done a whole lot of research into this. Conceptually, it seems to make sense. Are there folks out there who do this? I couldn't find any in my quick research. And number two, would there be any benefits to other folks? Would this be a benefit in your eyes to these other companies?
So what specifically would you be outsourcing for them, or what services?
The RIA component. So that whole side of it, being able to act as that third entity, I guess you could say. You got the LPGP and then the RIA component.
Hell yeah.
Acting as that third entity. Is that too much?
Of course, I think it'd be great. I mean, no one wants to go through the cost and process of starting their own RIA. So if they can come on to an already established RIA and just become an advisor, and then your RIA has to approve their product for the platform. Yeah, I think that's sexy as hell.
Hey, Matt, let's talk.
All right, Ryan, that sounds good.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, outsourcing things like investor relations services, compliance services, you can take on certain administrator tasks within the RIA. Those would all be things I think that would be really, really attractive for a fund manager who's looking at the prospect of having to register.
Yeah, I just don't know. I only see the demand from inside the black card community. I don't really see it beyond that. So coming from your perspective, I appreciate that a lot.
Yeah.
All right, we got room for one more question. Hold on. All right, you got your hand up. Let's go with you, Eliza. How are you?
Hi. Okay, this is just a follow-up question from Nicole's question. I just want to be clear again. Are we or we're okay not to have a license, Series 65 license as investor relations officer to raise a fund?
So if you are just an investor relations officer for a fund, you are not required to be Series 65 license, because that generally is not going to trigger the requirements of an investment advisor representative, who is someone generally who's receiving compensation for providing investment advisory services. So investor relations, you're making sure, and tell me if this is wrong, if you have responsibilities beyond that, but generally it's, making sure applications are complete, following up with different parties to make sure you've got the investor qualification letter, you've got payments in place. You're not providing advice. You're not telling a potential investor whether the fund is appropriate or suitable for them. It's more administrative in nature. So if you're in a role that's more administrative, that's not going to trigger a requirement to go get Series 65 license and be an IR. That being said, the company decides if they want to force that upon you. So while the rule may not be required, it's not uncommon for us to see companies require certain positions to go get that Series 65 license and become registered. So that becomes more of a firm level policy rather than a state or federal rule requirement.
Okay, so because in our group, it has become, it is a practice now to kind of like work our way out of it. But but now it seems like, we just want to play safe. And so we are kind of like getting into, we're just going to get our license because just to be on a safer side. But that's not the case. So, well, thank you so much. And thank you for your time with us today.
Sure. I love this stuff. Like, I nerd out on this all the time. So if I can come with a big group and be like, blah, 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 that's a fun day for me.
Leila, are you saying that we could maybe have you on again in a couple weeks?
Oh, you could. I may be in a hospital then, but I'll still tune in.
Come nerd out anytime you want.
Oh, I love it.
It's amazing.
Awesome. So guys, I'm going to put in the chat here Leila's website for my RIA lawyer, and then also put on her LinkedIn page. I would give her a follow on LinkedIn because she's always dropping gold nuggets on the latest updates and best practices, and just give her a follow there. Leila, what's the best way to get a hold of you? Like, let's say people want to continue the discussion, schedule a call, set up an ERA. How does that look? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can, so if you want a consultation, and I'll put the email in the chat, you can email let's do this at myralawyer.com. So that goes to our team. We're a law firm, so we do like a conflicts checked and everything. So there's a person that talks to you first to figure all that out. So that's let's do this. If you want to get on our newsletter, or if you just got some more generic questions, you can always email me directly. I'm happy to talk with you. My email address is also in there. And if you're not sure which one to email, just email me and I'll figure it out for you.
Did you put that in the chat? I didn't
Oh, I directed it to Matthew. I don't know why that went, why it went to that. Let me post it to everyone. There we go.
Boom. Awesome. Ballpark costs, maybe any potential black card discounts for setting up an ERA?
You're lucky Ryan like pre-cleared this shit for you guys. Yes, so we do exempt reporting advisor registrations for the low fixed fee cost of $4,500. So we'll have a talk with you. And it's, it's something like we want to help you understand what your requirements are. We do all the filings for you. We have those conversations. So if that's something you need to get done, reach out to us. We'll get it done for you. And we'll help you navigate it too. I recognize there's a lot of rules and regulations. They're not always straightforward or confusing. And I forget who mentioned before, they were looking at kind of requirements and they couldn't find any information because a lot of times there is gaps in what the regulators provide. And we really just have to figure out from conferences when they show up and tell us what they're doing, from guidance, just from working with them with other clients and through examinations. So we're here to help. Let us know how we can.
Boom. Awesome. So quick announcement. Again, thank you, Leila, for coming on. Quick announcement next week. So I have my own weekly office hours on Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, and I bring on my good friend, Marty Tate, SEC attorney expert. And next week, we're going to be talking about difficult discussions with your partners, right? Divorce, death, disease, how these things come up and how it affects your legal documents. I think I've seen so many people rush into these GP situations in the group, and it's like, hey guys, let's date before we get married a little bit. And how does that look on the legal doc side? So Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Leila.
Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Have a good one.
Bye.